Okay.
Let me know it's running. Yep, you're on.
Yes, she's running.
Video.
The goal is to keep it
Let's mix that up a bit. I do your talk, you do my talk.
Oh yeah, that'll keep it fresh.
Do it, get away. Where are you from, Vanessa? Osman.
Yes,
Okay.
so we look after it's companies, like anybody working in the mining industry, so in the mining technology services. Yeah, we work a lot with miners and vets and connections.
Saasha, you from Order?
Yes, yes, I'm set. Thank you.
We have
In mining,
very much into mining, oil and gas, building construction, logistics.
we might be interested
Wow, I love that. Everyone's sitting at the back.
Quite tall.
Ask me a question.
What I have to scan yours.
God asked me a question.
Oh, thank you.
Nobody is? Okay. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Insight's in-house event. Thanks for coming along. My name is Peter Kinsman. I'm the host for you today. I'm also the general manager for Insight Innovation Partners, where we optimize the research and development claims for our clients. But before we do anything, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this wonderful land that we live in and work in, and also like to acknowledge the elders of the previous and past and future too. So now it's an exciting time for us because we've got two excellent speakers for you. Couple of in-house rules if you don't mind. First and foremost, you all know what to do with a mobile phone. Please kindly switch it off. I'll put it on silent. And second request is, if you do have any burning questions, which I know you will have, please just hang on to them till after both the presenters has finished their presentations. Don't worry, you have plenty of time for Q&A, okay? And if by chance Mother Nature calls, you just have to step out the same door you came in and veer to the left, and then you'll be looked after there. Okay, now, without much further ado, I'd just like to introduce our very first speaker, Saasha Callaghan, the Technical Manager of OLEOLOGY. But before I introduce Saasha and her presentation, we got water in my hand. Chemical formula is H2O. Simple, but I don't really know how that works, but obviously it does. So look, there's plenty of it around. It's cheap, it's everywhere, it can be boring. 90% of us are made of water, I understand. But let Saasha tell you more about water and how they treat them in oleology. So can you please give a warm welcome to Saasha.
Thank you, Peter, and the rest of Insight as well for inviting me to talk. Now I'm going to do this business.
I will.
That one.
Sorry, my apologies.
And Amy, that's all good to go? Cool. promise there.
Like we're streaming this all over the world.
I was told alt tab.
Yeah. Where's...
My apologies.
Julia. Oh, yep. Hold on to it. Yep.
Yep.
And then maybe use the
The right one?
yeah. That's it.
Is it gone?
It's
No.
all right, I
No,
got
hang on, hang on,
One
hang on,
more?
hang on.
Yep. F5.
It wasn't exactly how you requested, but that's okay.
Thanks, Julia.
Awesome. We're just going to continue playing.
That's it.
Oh, yeah, okay, we're good.
That's all right, it will
Awesome.
disappear. It will disappear.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to make this as interesting as possible for everyone. Water treatment. So Oleology is celebrating its 20th birthday, I should say, next year. We're pretty proud of it, considering we are a locally grown company in Perth. And that in itself is interesting. So we might stumble across some of those stories as we go. So essentially, Oleology revolves around some few basic principles, which is removing of the emerging hazardous contaminants, which actually affects all of us, and I will go into that. A lot of what I do is actually just educate a lot of people. So if I can pass on some of that, because we are all affected by water, directly or indirectly through business. And the part that we've really noticed over the past, especially 5 years, actually for us it's been 10, for the general public it's been the last 5, just purely because of media, is a lot of the contaminants that are coming through, the emerging hazardous contaminants, that Australia is a signatory to the Stockholm Convention, is kind of a big deal, and I want to explore some of that. Obviously, lowering costs is always nice, helping the bottom line, whether you've got large industry improving their shareholder profits, but also less waste, which is helping those in the environmental sector. We're essentially able to do both. And displacing the conventional technology, the limitations. Come on through. So something that we recently had a talk about with the US EPA only last week was that Australia follows the US EPA quite closely. And what we have noticed in our discussions with the US EPA across all states of the US was that they are only holding their laws, their regulatory guidelines, purely by what technology is able to achieve. And what we were telling them was, well, actually, you can not have to step on eggshells. There is better technology out there that you can lower those discharge requirements, and it doesn't have to be a burden to industry. So essentially, what we do as Oleology is we take this water into that water, nice and clean, and we do that through a MySelects filter. So, as a company though, we remove quite a few contaminants. We are the cog that fits in the very big wheel in various industries, whether it be oil and gas, mining, marine, heavy industry, defense, that seems to be always on its own. And we also have a lot of specialist qualifications in PFAS removal, mercury, and also nitrates and ammonia. So we do a lot of very specific specialties within the spectrum of water. We do a lot of R&D, hence why we work closely with Insight. We do a lot of work in that field because we are constantly on the leading edge, or the thin edge of the wedge. We're leading the industry in its innovation and have done for the past 19 years. What we've become very aware of, and we have done a lot of work to improve, is that we're over the fact of being Australia's best kept secret. So we've now done a lot of work in sharing what we're able to do and aiding other companies. Now that could even go into other waste contractors, because that's what they do. They're aiding the environment, but we're able to help them reach those regulations that they require. So with what we've been able to do, we've done a few awards, but with a real focus here, because we understand that industry has that priority on ESG. So the environmental social governance, how can we also bridge the gap between achieving that for the shareholders and the bottom line, along with regulatory agencies around the country and also around the world. So that's what we've done. So we've done a lot of work. If we had more dots, it would just become one big dot around the country. We've got a bit of work as well happening up in Malaysia and Singapore with the likes of Petronas, helping them with what they need to do and also aiding in their portfolio in helping the local communities. Working with Rio Tinto in Quebec because of what we've done in Australia because of the mining. So our work in the mining industry is quite revolutionary, and Rio Tinto has seen that, and because of the harsh conditions and the robustness of the technology and what we've done, they're seeing that application for other mining places. You can see a little dot down there, Antarctica. We've done some work down there as well. Unfortunately, I can't show you the photos because Antarctica doesn't have a problem. So, what else have we done? Like I said, we've worked in the oil and gas space, onshore and offshore. I'm sure you've probably recognized a few of those logos. Marine as well. Really interesting actually in the marine space, the regulations on what you can discharge to the river is actually better than what comes out of our drinking tap. So there is the cases of metals that you have to be aware of. So what we did for South of Perth Yacht Club was they had a massive rebuild about 4 years ago, and they upgraded their slipway. So a profit generating application for all of their clients and other existing clients in WA. And they needed to treat the wastewater from washing down the boat hulls before discharging it to the river. And you're having to get it really clean before you're able to discharge it. And we said, well, why not negate that problem? Because that's also gonna be a very expensive solution for you. We can do it, it's just an extra expense. So what we did for them was have our treatment system, 20-foot container, put in there to systematically remove all the other co-contaminants that were in the water that they could then reuse on site for their slip down bay, and also use it as a top-up water supply for their emergency fire supply. So they were able to essentially 2 birds with 1 stone, and they didn't have to have that heartache and also pass that cost on to their members. Our work in mining, we've done quite a few different mine sites, that's just a few of them. As well, working with local government, City of Perth, actually Hay Street and Murray Street, and even St. George's Terrace, the trees that go alongside the both sides of St. George's Terrace, we actually installed the MySelects technology at the base of each tree. And I'll explain soon why the MySelects were so effective, but it actually enhanced the growth of the trees within 12 months. So something really simple because of all the stormwater runoff that those trees were having to manage. And general industries. Wherever there's water, we're essentially there. Essentially we deal with oily water, PFAS, mercury and nitrates. Pretty basic, very wordy. Let's skip over that because this is the more exciting bit. So MySelects is actually a technology that was produced over in the US. It is a polymer. If I had a glass of water and I dropped oil in it, and let's say I was able to shake it up or mix it up, you'd have free oil and emulsified oil. Emulsified oil has that chemical bonding with some of the molecules, and it can be further enhanced if I had degreaser in there or even dishwashing liquid. It would turn into like a milky white or even very light. You wouldn't even be able to see it. Those are the really hard to get oil contaminants that are in the water. What MySelects is really good is that it's oleophilic, which means it only has a chemical bonding with the oil, hydrocarbons, other organic matter, and it's also hydrophobic, it repels water. So it makes it very good at filtering the water while also producing a very low waste, because you're not having to deal with sludge that mix with water and the waste product. It's a dry waste, which can also be thermally oxidized. So therefore, you actually have no waste in the end. You can now use that waste as an energy source. So it starts to fill in that circular economy. Very simple, this is what it looks like. These are the filters that we have, varying properties of removing certain contaminants, and that's where the smarts of it comes into. We're not having to deal with chemical dosing or anything like that. It is all permanently fixed into the filters themselves. But this was all made in the US. Patents are surrounded by it. But what oleology has done is that we have taken this, further enhanced it, and also stumbled across some very interesting applications to it. I'll give you an example of one. So this is the case study with, AngloGold Ashanti. That wasn't exactly covert. But AngloGold had an issue with their mine site, and the general communication that we receive from various clients is they go, we just need something here to treat oily water separation. And we went, that's great, but what else is happening on site? And they said, oh, actually we need to, we're actually interested in upgrading our RO treatment plant to supply and increase production for all of our facilities on the mine site. Now, those facilities could be to the wash bay, to mining operations, to supply to their mining campsite. And we said, not an issue. Why don't you keep the RO that you currently have? Don't put capital to it. Save that money. Spend only a small portion. We'll put our treatment system by the wash bay and recycle that water so that when you're doing any of your mining operations on site, all of the water that you need for the asset producing, mining of that gold, all of that other water from your RO system can go to that operations. And the demand doesn't have to be sacrificed to also sustain the water treatment and the wash down facilities on the mine site. So that worked brilliantly. The hard part is that they had really high concentrations of oil. When you get up to 100 plus ppm, parts per million, that's when you really start seeing oil sheen on the water. And also they had the things of Legionella and E. coli, especially when you're doing wash downs. You're not really meant to breathe it in. So you got the health and safety of it as well for all staff on site. So we were also able to do that. Something else we did as well, this skid, you may recognize it was in a previous photo. This skid's gone around the world. It's got more stamps in the passport than I do. This has gone on multiple sites. We did this one specifically for Woodside. They needed that for a 6-month hire, and was able to treat the process water they had on their floating platform overboard, well below EPA requirements, and save them significant capital that they had to deal with. This is another mine site that we did, and this was actually very much a story that we hear a lot of, is existing oil water separators not complying. And that was just because it was really technology that was great decades ago, but the technology has changed along with those regulations, and where they had to be is now. So we were able to do it as a retrofit system, install that on site, and they were able to actually reuse the water in their dust suppression trucks and not have to have an increase in water supply to maintain those dust suppression trucks. Something really bizarre, something that you wouldn't even think about, was that those dust suppression trucks couldn't actually keep in operation because the little nozzles kept blocking up with solid. And you think something so minute, but it was having a huge increase and also increasing their labor force in having to maintain these trucks when all they had to do was treat the water to a cleaner quality. So we did that for them. But I did mention about there was a new kid on the block, the hazardous chemical. Yes, you can call it that. But who is it? Now, I only bring up this quote because it's just so relevant. We have a technology that has a lot of great applications, and we purely stumbled across another application for it. And that was for the use of PFAS. So if you haven't heard of it before, has anyone actually heard of PFAS? One? Okay, there's a few. So PFAS is the newest emerging contaminant that is really having a big impact in Australia, but actually internationally. Now, I did mention the Stockholm Convention. So PFAS is it's actually an umbrella term for 6,000 sub-contaminants. PFAS we use on everything. It's a very good repellent, heat-resistant product. So we use it in such things as sunscreens, your grease-proof paper, your Teflon-coated pans. It's on our carpets. It's on our waterproof jackets. It's in our coolants because it's a heat-resistant product. It's literally in everything and is actually impacting throughout our whole supply chain, whether in industry or personally in our everyday lives. And the reason why it is such an issue is because it is so highly soluble. So we use the analogy of the onion layer. So you've got to actually get rid of all these other contaminants, so free oil, emulsions, dissolved metals, like everything that's in the water before you can even get to the PFAS. It's essentially the invisible enemy. We can't see it, smell it, taste it, but it's having a huge impact on our health because it's an endocrine disruptor. It will play with your hormones. I don't know if you've seen a movie called Dark Waters. It's got Anne Hathaway and Mark Ruffalo in it. Really recommend you go watch it. It's fantastic. But that actually explains the court case against DuPont that is still ongoing today. All about PFAS. And it is still a big issue now. And a lot of questions that I get, probably the biggest one that I get from people is, why haven't I heard of it? If this is such a big issue, why haven't I heard about it in the media? And there is a little bit coming out there, not enough, as far as I'm aware. But just as a local citizen in this country, I wouldn't want to have this. So personally, I don't use Teflon coated pans anymore. I just use steel. Safe to go that way. Grease-proof papers, all of that. Because if you put a paper in an oven and it doesn't burn, there's some other properties to it. It's a fantastic product. That's why we've used it since the 1940s. But it is now becoming a real issue for various industries. And the reason why it's becoming an issue for industries is you cannot discharge it to the environment. It has a half-life of 40 to 90 years. So think about the properties of mercury. We all understand it's not great for us. It also bioaccumulates in our system. PFAS does the same thing. And it will lead to, we already know there's irrefutable evidence out there that it is, like I said, an endocrine disruptor. Actually, I wonder if I might have a list already in there. But it also will cause birth defects. It will also decrease sperm count, increase ovarian cancer, liver cancer, kidney cancer, the list goes on. So it's an issue, and you may have heard as well a lot of firefighters getting cancers, thyroid, etc. Unfortunately, it's because of the use of the firefighting foams, because it's such a great chemical to use in firefighting, causing all of that foam to blanket the fire, that these firefighters were unfortunately exposed to it in very high doses. So, PFAS in the news, we have been up there a little bit, and I'll tell you the reasons why. But the Mining Review, they were very interested in what we did. We're able to share what we were doing, especially for the mining industry. And if anyone is interested, Paul, who's the director of OLEOLOGY, he's speaking next week at Crown on Thursday, purely on PFAS and its impact in mining. Paul's also been part of a 3-part series with the US Filtration News, talking specifically about PFAS. If you'd like to get up to date on PFAS, I really recommend head to our website, read these 3 articles, because it takes you through the steps, the history. It's the most up-to-date information you can get, because there's a lot of stuff out there. So the reason why we're able to do what we do is because we are the only company in the world who can take PFAS to non-detectable levels with essentially a zero waste. How we're able to do that is because we were actually stumbled across some work that we were doing for Perth Airport back in 2004. We were removing hydrocarbons down to parts per billion, and they asked, can you test for PFOS? I'm going, what's PFOS? And we said, okay, well, we'll test it. Tested for this contaminant called PFOS, which is one of the 6,000 under the PFAS umbrella. And PFOS and PFOA are two of the highly meteorized contaminants of PFAS. And we then realized that the Miselex has an affinity to PFAS. And from there, we were able to work out over the past decade, sharpening our sword on how best we can create this treatment system to better industry. So we were able to, like I said, the filters are a dry waste, very small footprint, and I'll show you how small. We're able to remove the hydrocarbons, because that's our bread and butter, as well as removing PFAS, along with other co-contaminants in the same system with a very high flow rate and no chemical dosing. So there was a lot of wins as well for the industry here. And because it's so effective at removing PFAS with a low size, low cost, low waste, and low risk, and like we've got here, 1/20th of the size of any other conventional system that's out there. So this is actually a little insight on what this system looks like. I've got some other photos for you. We're very lucky. I don't know if you've heard of a doctor here called Dr. Jimmy Seow. Very eminent in what he's done. He's one of the leading experts in PFAS in the world, just so happens to live in Perth. So we're very lucky. But he had a look at all of our data and hadn't seen anything about it. So of the 6,000 contaminants that I mentioned before, technically a laboratory can only test for 35 of them, which you then think, well, hang on, what about the others? There's going to be a few there that are flying under the radar. That's what you call as precursors. So there's actually special testing now that you can do to understand if there's something else in the background along with the other listed 35 contaminants. It's called a special TOPA test. We're able to also remove all of those other contaminants. So when you do a full sweep testing of everything in the water, you can then have absolute confidence that these other precursors, which they have now discovered, can actually reform in the future, break down, and create one of those listed 35 that is of a high consideration as being a hazardous waste, which is all within our everyday lives. I don't mean to scare you. I'm just creating a solution here for you though. So this is actually, sorry, thank you to Google Earth, but it's a little bit sketchy. This is actually an existing system that's over in New South Wales for an Air Force base. For the same flow rate, we can put in 4 20-foot containers for the same treatment. Along with as well, we can also do it with minimal waste because we're able to capture and more effectively treat the water to non-detect with other co-contaminants. There's a lot of systems out there that are really great at treating water. However, you don't just ever have PFAS in water, you're always going to have hydrocarbons or other co-contaminants in the water. So for example, this is what our system would look like. That is a system that can treat just shy of 1 million litres a day. We actually have a system that's just one container. So it just has a series of these filters, a little bit smaller, 2 of these vessels, which is the polishing media. So we systematically will remove all the contaminants as we go through the chain of vessels, various filters in sequence to systematically remove all the contaminants as we go through, polish the water off, ensuring there's no PFAS, and then discharge to environment. So even though we are not regulators, we are finding ourselves teaching the regulators around the country. We had a big event with them on a webinar about a month ago in Australia, educating them, saying you are well within your rights to lower recommended discharge rates because the technology is out there. Giving them the confidence to say to industry, you should do your due diligence and actually do what is right, but it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg. This is well within your rights. So we've really worked hard at trying to make this a cost-effective solution for industry. That's just more information there, sorry. Gallons per minute, we've done this a few times for the US. But yeah, that's just another example there. So to give you a bit of a spectrum as well of what we're working with in other technologies that are in the market. GAC is granular activated carbon, or ion exchange, or also known as resins. They don't necessarily have a small footprint. Think back to that photo that we had of the Google Earth. Those were very large vats that had to treat the water, but they don't treat it systematically. They just ensure that they try and capture all the contaminants at once, which means that the GAC is not very good at doing. GAC is very great at filtering, but not very good at filtering other co-contaminants in the water. Ion exchange is very good at capturing one contaminant at a time. It's specifically created to do such. So when you put the two together, they can work hand in hand, but they are a huge footprint. They don't necessarily capture the hydrocarbons to the levels that you need to before you even get to the PFAS. Remember the onion theory. You need to get rid of all the other contaminants before you can get to the PFAS. They have limits to how they can get to PFAS, but you have, unfortunately, creating a lot of waste. And they also rely heavily on regeneration, which for GAC you can't do in Australia, you have to ship it to Sweden. So that unfortunately doesn't work in anyone's favor, increases cost, OPEX and CAPEX. So with that, it doesn't necessarily. So what we've worked on is trying to achieve a success story for each of those hurdles along the way. And especially with the dry waste. The US, actually, the EPA, we had that meeting with them last week. They said to us that a lot of the collection sites accepting waste are now starting to not accept PFAS impacted GAC or ion exchange. That was very interesting for us because the dependence on thermally oxidizable areas are gaining traction, and to really remove PFAS, you actually have to remove PFAS when burning it to over 1200 degrees. So as a comparison, that's where we're at. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to come up and ask, or head to the website, gain some information for yourself. But thank you very much.